All right, as we often like to do on Mondays, we want to take a look at the news that's been buzzing over the weekend and bring on a panel from the Washington stand. And certainly the government shutdown remains the most talked about news, but there are some other notable news items that are out there to discuss as well. So now to go over some of those news items is Casey Harper and Mark Tapscott from the Washington stand. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jody.
My pleasure.
All right, let's start off with what everyone seems to be talking about, the government shutdown. We are now in day 27. Casey, you actually hit on this at the top of the program, so let me start with you. Can you unpack for us some more about this week, how this week really looks different, perhaps from previous weeks when it comes to the shutdown? We've got some deadlines coming up this week. How does that potentially change things?
Yeah, the second longest shutdown in government history is about to become a lot more painful for a lot of people for a few reasons. Congressional staffers for the House this week and then next week, the Senate, they're going to start missing those paychecks, though lawmakers will still get their paychecks. There's a caveat in the Constitution that prevents you can't just cut a lawmaker's salary. I think that was meant to avoid some pettiness from lawmakers. But it's not just the congressional staff. So many civilian employees across government agencies, they're going to miss, if they haven't already, they're going to miss their first full paychecks Tuesday or Thursday. So that's a big one. The troops are on the verge of not getting paid again unless President Trump pulls again from that emergency Pentagon research budget to pay the troops. But that budget is running low, so he can't do that indefinitely. We also talked at the top of the program, as you mentioned, about food stamps. 41 million Americans, November 1st, they're supposed to get those the SNAP benefits, and some states are working to help get those benefits still, but they're going to start missing those benefits, and states can't keep paying for them without the federal government forever. And then one more I'll mention, although there are others, Jody, is air traffic. We're going to start seeing air delays pile up more and more. They're already starting, but going into the all-important Thanksgiving travel season, if this doesn't get cleared up by then, there could be a lot of pain on the Thanksgiving travel front.
Yeah, there's a lot unfolding this week, so I know that puts a lot of pressure on them. Mark, let me run over to you now. You've written a piece that was published in the Washington Stand that really did an outstanding job digging into the part of this whole shutdown that many people may not be aware of, and that's what's fueling it all. Probably a better terminology, what's funding it all. And that's the demand for a permanent extension of temporary Obama tax subsidies. Take a moment, if you will, and unpack that for us.
Well, Jody, there is a phrase that I'm sure you've heard from time to time in your career. When you want to figure out what's really going on, you follow the money. And if these temporary Obamacare tax subsidies become permanent, as the Democrats are demanding that it be, here's what will happen. That will create approximately $52 billion in additional revenue for the health care insurance industry. That's a lot of money, and they are spending lavishly on lobbying, and they have been all of this year, to make sure that they don't lose that income. The $52 billion would be over and above what they're getting now, which is in the neighborhood of $40 billion a year. So it shouldn't surprise any of us. They've spent, their 10 largest health insurance companies have spent about $24 million just through the end of September on lobbying. That's the most they've ever spent in this particular, that period through the third quarter. So you follow the money, you see what's really at stake for the Democrats.
Yeah, and I think somebody has to ask the question, if Obamacare was such a great deal, then why are subsidies even needed? But I guess that's a discussion for another time. Mark, while I've got you, let me ask you this. Speaking of behind-the-scenes money, if we can put it that way, there's an open-source intelligence report that has gotten some attention over the weekend, and it basically has revealed how China provided more than $500 million to top-ranked American universities in recent years. What is that all about?
Well, the Chinese have, for a number of years, they literally have sent millions of students to American schools because we still have the best education system at the graduate level. And in the process of that, they also have cultivated relationships, programmatic and personal, at Harvard, Yale, you name a major university in this country, and they have done it. And one of the calling cards for that is obviously money to fund professorships, for example. And with professorships in the academic world, he who pays the bill decides what gets taught. And that's basically what the Chinese are trying to do here, to shape how education is done here in America.
Wow, now that's startling information. Let me throw that back over to you, Casey, as well. I mean, this is pretty concerning when potentially the Chinese Communist Party is quietly steering who and what gets funded and actually perhaps even what gets taught at our universities.
Yeah, I mean, they certainly have a hand in steering the content of the education, and that's pretty troublesome. But it's not just that, Jody. They actually steal an incalculable amount of intellectual property, and they target specific the best universities and specific STEM and science programs. And it's important to know that they're not just stealing from Stanford, although they have, or not just stealing from Harvard, although they have. They're stealing, research that took maybe 10 years of federally funded research.
Yes.
Right. So the federal government pays millions of dollars to these universities to find cures, to come up with weapons technology, to develop new ways to make solar panels slightly more efficient so they can go on an aircraft carrier or something like that. And then at the end of the process, as Mark alluded to, that there's a Chinese national student or a bought-off professor just hands the information over. And this is not just speculation. I mean, you have the data that Mark laid out, but there's a Harvard professor, for instance, who is getting $50,000 a month. $50,000 a month from this Chinese group that is helping coordinate with professors and pay them off. And he was eventually charged for something related to that. But he's just one example. It's not just Harvard. It's all these universities, and they're stealing secrets. They're stealing research that Americans paid for to fund. So, and I'll point out one more thing before I toss it back to you, Jody, which a lot of people don't know this, is that Chinese national students who come to study in the U.S. are legally obligated in China to cooperate with Chinese intelligence gathering operations, even when they're in the U.S. So if you're a Chinese national from Hong Kong, you come to the U.S. to study at a place like Stanford, and the Chinese intelligence gathering folks call you up, you're obligated legally to work with them whether you want to or not, and you will face legal consequences if you don't. And there's thousands of these students at schools all around the country.
So in essence, they're spies.
Yeah, unwilling often, but yeah, they're
unwilling. But I mean, the Chinese government is using them in that way. Right. Casey, let me keep you while I've got you here right now. Let's turn to some good news if we can dig some up here. There's got to be some around here somewhere.
Yeah.
But a federal judge last week actually ruled against the former Biden administration's attempt to rewrite Title IX to force the radical gender ideology on the American people. Tell us a little bit about that case. I know you've been following it.
Yeah, I've written a lot about this this case that's been going on for years and years, and it's hard to understate the importance of this. So basically what the Biden administration did, this did not get a lot of attention at the time, but they took laws that were meant to protect, ironically, to protect women in women's sports, and they changed the meanings of the words in the laws to make it also apply to transgender people. So the law, specifically says you can't discriminate on people against people on the basis of sex, and that was meant to protect women's sports, and to make sure that you weren't like denying care to women for some reason, or giving way more money to the guys' football team and not giving any money to the women's volleyball team. That's what it was meant to do, to protect women. But the Biden administration said, well, that word sex, even though it was written in 1972 and it's meant sex ever since it was written, it actually meant gender identity and sexuality, Jody. You didn't know that, but that's what those lawmakers in 1972 and decades ago meant when they wrote sex. They meant the gender spectrum that hadn't even been invented then. And so because of that, they were able to force on schools all kinds of, and other institutions, all kinds of different policy changes, and threaten to withhold federal funding, and say, in the case of healthcare, a nurse or someone could be punished for refusing to engage in some kind of transgender procedure or something because it was discrimination on the basis of sex. And so this ruling is really important because it undoes what Biden did there, and it does not just apply to the 15 states that filed the lawsuit, but it applies in all 50 states.
So, Mark, give me your take on this. Is this just another example of the left trying to hijack something that perhaps was created originally for good, but now is being hijacked to advance a radical agenda?
Oh, I think that's exactly what it is. As it happens, I have a good friend who was the first ever women's field hockey scholarship winner at the University of Virginia. This is some years back, right after the Title IX took effect. And you look at what's happening now. She was quite petite. She's very fast, very, very quick on her feet. But if she had to play today against trans males who may weigh 100 pounds more than her, she would very likely be injured. And that would, she would not be unique in that. The trans ideology is intended by the left to give bureaucrats in government supervision over that aspect of American education. And it's a serious, serious problem.
It is a serious problem and a dangerous problem. Who would ever have imagined, even 5 years ago, that we would be watching men in women's sports?
Yeah.
And we've seen a number of women injured with all of this.
Absolutely.
Who would have ever imagined that we would be here? Casey, let me come back to you. You had mentioned that there were 15 states here, but this ruling is going to go beyond the 15 states. So how does that work? What do you see this going long term? What is this actually going to mean on a national scale?
Yeah, well, it's good news, obviously, for those opposed to the forcing of transgender ideology on these schools and other places. Anything can always go to the Supreme Court, but who can predict that? Right now, this is a major win in an issue that the right has largely stacked up win after win after win at the Supreme Court. And you have to think that the opponents actually will not be eager to bring it to this court because this court has shown to be disfavorable to some of the arguments there. But long term, what does it really mean? It means that institutions that want to be unbiased or stay out of the transgender thing, they can stay out of it. It's important to know that the Biden administration's policy was not, hey, everybody just kind of make your own decisions, live and let live. The Biden administration policy said you will fully embrace the transgender ideology. You will put money behind it. You will change signs on doors. You will provide different facilities. And if you don't, you will lose money and you might be fined. And schools, I wrote years ago about how they were threatening to take school funding. A lot of schools get federal assistance to pay for lunch for low-income kids. The Biden administration was threatening to take that money away from schools that didn't get on board, for instance, with transgender locker rooms. And this was not just education; it was across the board. But education's, of course, been a big battlefield on this.
Yeah.
And Mark, that goes right back what you were saying earlier. You invariably follow the money trail, and it'll lead you to all sorts of issues that we need to have brought to our attention and to be dealt with. I didn't ask you, Mark, real quickly, your thoughts on the government shutdown this week. You were talking about the money trail and all those things. Where do you see? What's your take on what you think might happen this week?
I don't really expect much of anything to happen this week. I know there are some informal talks going on between some Senate Republicans and Senate Dems. There's frankly not a lot of encouragement that those talks are going to result in anything. My guess is we're going to have to see some real manifestation of serious pain. Thanksgiving flights not being available, for example. SNAP children not being able to be fed before we're going to see some serious consideration of what's going on and Democrats in the Senate reconsidering their position.
Well, it's going to be an extremely important week seeing how all this unfolds. There's a lot at stake. You just look at the whole landscape. There's the presidents in Asia, so much at stake in that trip that is taking place. We've got the shutdown and a host of things happening in our own country. We look across to Israel and we see all the issues that are happening there. It just seems like the whole world is on fire. And I just want to personally say a huge shout out and thank you to both of you and all those at the Washington Stand for an outstanding job that you do of keeping us informed of what's happening. And we are deeply grateful. I want to thank both of you gentlemen for joining us today on Washington Stand. We appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
Jody.